So this is my commentary, reflection on the Platonic dialogue, the Sophist. Now, I'd like to give a couple introductory statements. The first thing I'd like to say is that Plato is an interesting character. My relationship with him, I think, is an interesting relationship. It's interesting in the sense that I go through these waves. I'm not sure if everybody that participates with Plato experiences this, but sometimes there are these periods. Given that I read this over a period of weeks, even a period of months, I might spend on a particular dialogue or whatever. There are these periods for which I dip into this disposition of not knowing, and sometimes that can bubble up in me and exert a type of disunification of mind, and it results in a little bit of anxiety, but also inattentiveness, and it's something that is very dangerous. Any philosopher, I think, that does this to a mind, or any mind that is incapable of grasping a concept such that it disintegrates in a sense, not in totality, of course, but disintegrates in a sense that there is this sort of instability of experience, then I think that this is dangerous. Now, I mention that because there are times for which I dip down into this territory. On the other side of it, I come out almost always. But I bring this up for myself, but also to those that might be listening. This experience, I think, is an experience that is much broader than just wrestling with and chewing on Platonic ideas. There is that capacity for the absence of mind in our everyday lives, where we get too comfortable, where we desire something to be simpler than it ought to be, that our sacrifices, we view them in our mind to be these things that are nothing but enjoyable because we have a fondness of memory for them, but we forget the suffering that was necessary to achieve what we had achieved. And so there's a prideful delusion that can take place. And so whether it be because we are putting forth effort, struggling with a difficult philosophical idea, or we find ourselves interacting with a coworker, a family member, a friend, and we lose that interest of mind, we lose that that logos of control, attention, then it's best to reflect, to sit down for a moment, just like I'm trying to introduce here, and to say, the purpose of our strivings, at least in some measure, is to come to some understanding, to improve confidence, just confidence, to accept those sacrifices, however painful, need to be accepted in order to achieve good things, to accept the reality of situations, to perceive the truth. And so with an air of honesty, or maybe a desire of honesty, and a desire of humility, we have to approach the Platonic dialogues. And if we find ourselves in that territory of confusion, which may happen, many of the dialogues end on a sort of unresolved note. I don't see why this dialogue is going to be any exception. There has to be continual reflection to make sure that understanding is there. And so throughout this episode, I would like it to make it my goal to try my best to explain my thought process, however incorrect it may be. And I will do so because I am trying to learn myself. And this sort of experience, this recording, is one of the ways that I find solace in my experience of life. So that's the first thing. The second thing is potentially giving an introduction of where we have been. This is part 8, I think, of my commentary. So preceding this, there's about 14 hours of material. And so there's a lot there that I've gone over. Sometimes there is that experience like a rat in a maze where there's a dead end and you sort of retrace your steps and you find yourself back at some beginning point, and perhaps all said and done, there really wasn't much linear motion from point A to point B, but the ground that was covered was still useful mental exercise and all of this sort of thing. I suppose in the simplest sense, what we are trying to find here is the Sophist. In Plato's words, we are hunting the Sophist. And what this conversation has evolved into is a conversation about being and non-being, essentially. And we are formulating it seems like a philosophical theory that includes 5 forms. One is change, one is rest, one is that which is, one is difference, and one is sameness. Now, the last episode was one of the episodes that I felt a bit insecure about. Partly because perhaps I didn't spend enough time on the particular sections. I tried my best to go back to where I felt like I misunderstood, especially when a new day had passed, to go over the territory again. And I think I improved on that understanding. But I'd like to explain sort of where I left off in terms of my understanding. And my potential problems. So there, in terms of the understanding about these 5 forms, that is certain that we are developing these things out. That which is one of those fundamental things. It is a descriptor that is very broad. It covers everything that is, obviously. And so in some sense, this can be a kind of a difficult topic, unless it is paired to something that is experiential, practical, analogous, whatever. When we get into the conversation of difference, sameness, there is difficulty for me, especially given some of the things that has been said by our visitor. And here's a good time, perhaps, that I should mention the conversation, the dialogue, is between 2 people. One is a visitor that is from a Greek colony in Italy called Elea, and an Athenian youth, Theaetetus, who has a relationship with Socrates. Now, if there is some noise in the background, it's because I'm moving some coins on a desk, and where we left off last time was utilizing these coins to make the 5 forms. Now, initially, when I was trying to conceptualize the relationship between these, I separated them into different categories. That which is sort of the centerpiece. It's on the mantle for me, because it's such a broad category. It includes so many things. It includes things like difference and the rest of the forms. Without that which is, something like difference, which is inherently relational, which describes the relationship between things, would be impossible. And I think the same is the same for sameness. Now, these 2 things, difference and sameness, these two qualities, or types, as the visitor says, these, I feel, are a little bit less fundamental than change and rest. That is, perhaps even the language here, less fundamental, isn't appropriate. They're both fundamental forms, but they participate with the forms in different ways. Sameness can be it can permeate change and it can permeate rest. Difference can permeate change and it can permeate rest. That which is permeates all of them, but they all maintain a degree of independent identity. It would be impossible for one of them to be entirely caught up in another one of them. Like, for example, difference cannot be the same as change. Otherwise, difference and change would be one thing and not distinct identities. And so there has to be this recognition that there is something about the distinctness of its own identity that causes it to be. There's a nature to it, an essence to it. But at the same time, it cannot be denied that, in Theaetetus' words, I'm trying to find it here, that these forms blend with one another, that there is a relationship such that they almost, here's a semantic instability that I'm introducing here, but they almost share in an identity. Now, I think this is where we have to be careful because there can be confusion there. Identity is a very slippery subject, as we all know, in this modern era in 2025. So anyway, this is sort of where we are now, and we're still discussing the five forms. On the previous page, we undertook a new journey, and the visitor sort of fires the starting gun, so to speak, by saying, let's take up each of the five one by one and say this, and then he sort of extends out from there. Now at the end of the page, the visitor says, so shall we go on fearlessly contending that change is different from that which is. So the plan here now, as I mentioned on the previous episode, it is to read 2 pages in their entirety, and then to come back and reflect and interpret on what I've just read. The first reading I probably won't retain much information, so going through it again with a fine-tooth comb is going to be the way to go. Intermittently, I may introduce a new paragraph that I haven't gone over before without its association with the broader text, and sometimes that type of interpretation works well, sometimes it's a bit exhausting and doesn't work very well. But either way, we're going to revert here to our 2-page reading and then reflection. So Theaetetus says, yes, we should be absolutely fearless. The visitor, so it's clear that change really is both something that is not, but also a thing that is, since it partakes in that which is. That's absolutely clear. So it has to be possible for that which is not to be, in the case of change and also as applied to all the kinds. That's because as applied to all of them, the nature of the different makes each of them not be, by making it different from that which is. And we are going to be right if we say that all of them are not in this same way. And on the other hand, we're also going to be right if we call them beings, because they have a share in that which is. It seems that way, says Theaetetus. So as concerning each of the forms, that which is extensive, and that which is not is indefinite in quality. That seems right. So we have to say that which is itself is different from the others. necessarily. So even that which is not, in as many applications as there are of the others, since, not being them, it is one thing, namely itself, and on the other hand it is not those others, which are an indefinite number. I suppose so. So then we shouldn't even be annoyed about this conclusion, precisely because it's the nature of kinds to allow association with each other. And if somebody doesn't admit that, then he needs to win us over from our earlier line of argument for it, in order to win us over from its consequences. That's entirely fair. Now let's look at this. What? It seems that when we say that which is not, we don't say something contrary to that which is, but only something different from it. Why? It's like this. When we speak of something as not large, does it seem to you that we indicate a smaller rather than an equal? Of course not. So we won't agree with somebody who says that negation signifies a contrary. We'll only admit this much. When not and non are prefixes to names that follow them, they indicate something other than the names, or rather, other than the things to which the names following the negation are applied. Absolutely. If you don't mind, though, let's think about this. What? The nature of the different appears to be chopped up, just like knowledge. Why? Knowledge is a single thing, too, I suppose. But each part of it that has to do with something is marked off and has a name particular to itself. That's why there are said to be many expertises and many kinds of knowledge. Of course. And so the same thing happens to the parts of the nature of the different, too, even though it's one thing. Maybe, but shall we say how? Is there a part of the different that's placed over against the beautiful? Yes. Shall we say that it's nameless, or does it have a name? Theaetetus responds, it has a name. What we call not beautiful is the thing that's different from nothing other than the nature of the beautiful. Now go ahead and tell me this. What? Isn't it in the following way that the non-beautiful turns out to be, namely, by being both marked off within one kind of those that are, and also set over against one of those that are? Yes. Then it seems that the not beautiful is a sort of setting of being over against a being. That's absolutely right. Well then, according to this account, is the beautiful more a thing than the not beautiful? Not at all. So we have to say that both are not large, and the large equally are. Yes. So we also have to put the not just on a par with the just, in that neither is any more than the other. Of course. And we'll speak about the others in the same way, too, since the nature of the different appeared as being one of those that are. And because it is, we have to posit its parts as no less beings. Of course. So it seems that the setting against each other of the nature of a part of the different and the nature of that which is not any less being, if we're allowed to say such a thing, than that which is itself. And it does not signify something contrary to that which is, but only something different from it. Okay, so that concludes our 2 pages. So let's work our way through this and figure out what they're saying. So at the outset I had mentioned the difficulty of understanding the relationship between the forms that we have here. So again, that which is that which is at rest, that which changes, difference and sameness. So in the first instance, the visitor says, change really is both something that is not, but also a thing that is, since it partakes in that which is. He poses that as a question, but it works as a declarative. So change is something that we all experience day in and day out. Sometimes change is welcome, sometimes it's painful, sometimes it's, when we perceive it to be painful, we wish it not to be. Sometimes when it is painful, we understand that it should be, despite its the discomfort that it provides us. When we go through change, when something changes, when we remember those incidents of change, we can focus on a few different elements of the experience. We can focus on that which has come to be from that which was. We can focus on that which was that had ceased to be. And of the type that we focus on that which was that had ceased to be, I think we find ourselves in that territory. Change really is both something that is not, but also a thing that is. So something that has come into being. Something that is related to that which was. That which was necessary for now that which is. And he continues, he says, so it has to be possible for that which is not to be. So we're really starting to get to the crux of the issue here. When we started this, there was this deep confusion or desire to know how to resolve the fact that that which is not is an identity in and of itself. Except its identity is to identify absence. That which is not. And on the surface it seems like it's something that's contrary to being, but much like difference, it sort of exists in the in-between, in the relational sphere. So it has to be possible for that which is not to be. So I should be a little bit more clear when I say this. It has to be possible for that which is not to be. It's easy to mistake that statement if it's not said correctly. So we're speaking of that which is not. And just as I've mentioned, I've maintained this from the beginning, and this is something that comes up in the Proverbs in the Old Testament, that it makes sense to conceptualize of that which is not, or absence, especially when it's grounded in man's experience, where we might experience wickedness or evil that tends towards this extreme selfish behavior, this sort of ischemic psychological state in the case of the wicked, but in the absolute absence of the desire of anything to be. The divine creative element is an antagonism in the minds of those individuals that are truly evil. That even here, what we are prompted to consider is that being, or that which is so much broader than the forces that tempt it into its absence, into its absolute absence. And so, in a rather bizarre switch, we have to sort of justify that which is not as something that is. But it seems like a contradiction. The concept, the essence of absence, by itself, is much like difference by itself. Can you have difference from itself? Well, no, it doesn't really work that way. We can still say it's an identity, but it's a relational identity. It requires two parties for it to work its magic, to show itself. And in the same manner, I sort of conceptualize, at least up until this point, it may change in the future, but for right now it makes the most sense to me to say that if we speak about that which is not by itself, then we run into the contradiction. But as soon as we ground it in being, then we understand that it's much like difference. It's a relational thing. That when we speak of something that changes, I think about a psychological state. That perhaps during COVID or a couple of years ago, I was in a different mental state. It wasn't as enjoyable as it is now. Suffering was greater. I wouldn't say that it was a bad state. It was an important state. It was a necessary state, but it was a state of rapid change. A lot of sacrifice and a lot of new initial states of mind were born of that experience. But I could see how that which is not, in terms of my current thinking and psychological state, compared to how it was, I can see all of those things that I have sacrificed. Whereas that which is not maybe would not necessarily make sense in the context of true absence, let's say, where there's nothing for me to relate to my relate that other forms of being to. It has to be possible for that which is not to be. In the case of change, and also as applied to all the kinds. That's because, as applied to all of them, the nature of the different makes each of them not be, by making it different from that which is. So let's chew on this for a moment. Now, when Plato mentions, in the case of change, and also as applied to all of the kinds, what I'm thinking about in all of the kinds are the forms that we're talking about, so the five sort of pillars that I mentioned. His justification, because as applied to all of them, the nature of the different makes each of them not be. Now, why would we use the difference as a justification for our previous statement? Now, difference, as I mentioned, is a relational idea that from an intelligent perspective, difference is something that is recognizable between two separate identities based on their qualities, despite the qualities that they might share. It's easiest to imagine difference in terms of two separate material or physical objects. It's much more difficult when we are thinking about one object and the differences that may lie within a singular identity. We can think about any organism, including ourselves, in that way. We can look under a microscope, and we can find a whole collective ecosystem of things that are interacting to cause us to be. And yet the thing that is speaking into the microphone is the thing that believes that it is in control of all of it and directing it. And I think that that's true. But all of this blends together in a way to make it true. And it's not that one principle or that difference itself in its essence is the thing that occupies its identity. But difference is necessary for the identity to exist. That's because, as applied to all of them, the nature of the different makes each of them not be, by making it different from that which is. So it is true that identities are made different from that which is. And it might seem like another contradiction that we, or a contradiction that we find ourselves in here, a paradox. But I don't think it necessarily is. And I mean that in the following sense. Since difference is a relational term, and its experience or its existence doesn't stop at that which is, we have to think then that as different finds its way through these things, producing, or highlighting, maybe is a better word, things that are not. Things that are seemingly opposed to that which is. But opposition here, again, we will get into, may not be the most productive language. Things that find themselves on a state somewhat different, on a plane somewhat different. Perhaps this is even farther afield. Things that find themselves different from that which is transitory. Now, I don't wish to invoke time here absolutely, but there's a sense in which this transitory quality of that which is that may find absence at a particular point, only to rediscover some unification again. It is this. It is within these moments, again, so it's kind of hard to imagine that this not being so intimately connected to time, but as they happen, the beautiful thing is that which is not surrendered to absence. It is altered by it. And we're going to be right if we say that all of them are not in this same way. And on the other hand, we're also going to be right if we call them beings, because they have a share in that which is. So there's a way in which there is the absolute beingness of our forms, and there's a way in which they relatively flow or blend with each other to have that which is not be an identity of change or be an identity of alteration within the substrate of that which is. So today happens to be a new day, new thoughts. It happens to be the evening, a Thursday evening after work. So let's jump right into this. Theaetetus says it seems that way. The visitor, so as concerning each of the forms, that which is extensive. Surely a reflection that all of us must have by now, that which is encompasses so much, and because of its volume, because of its nature, it's even difficult at times to determine exactly how to conceptualize it. And he says, and that which is not is indefinite in quantity. So indefinite, a word meaning without boundary, without something that defines what it is. Now, quantity is some value that we can give to something. It's almost continues in this paradoxical matter or situation, whatever, that which is not is something that is, in a way, something that exists, something that is relational, but something very difficult to think about of itself without anything else in relation. The visitor continues, so even that which is not, in as many applications as there are of the others, since not being them, it is one thing, namely, itself. And on the other hand, it is not those others, which are an indefinite number. So here we find ourselves talking a little bit more in detail about the relationship between that which is and that which is not. Now I want to mention that I've upgraded my previous physical schema, my physical representation for the 5 forms. Instead of having 5 coins, and that which is being substituted by a silver piece, I instead have taken out these metal chess pieces. I've taken out 5 of them. One is a king, one is a queen, one is a bishop, one is a knight, and one is a rook. Their status in the game doesn't really carry over here. However, I have made the king represent that which is. Now, what I find interesting here is that among the 4 forms, we are not really talking about, or among the 5 forms, we're not speaking of that which is not as a 6th. And what the visitor says here, I think, sheds some light on why that might be the case. So if we remove everything, and we bring forward our king, and we examine him, and we see that this is all that there is, even that which is not. Well, that's a strange thing to say, because clearly he is. I'm holding him in my hand. How could it possibly be that he is not? Now, there's some issues here with the way that this is perceived. Holding him in my hand, the thing that represents all that there is, that's not possible. I am a part of that which is, and so I can't reach my hand up outside of that and grab that which is. I can grab something that is, surely, which is the king in this analogy. But if I blow this king up to be the totality of things, and I stick my hand forward, what is this experience? I have seen by difference, I have seen by contrast, whatever, that my action is independent of many things. There are many things that have not happened. There are many of the change that has happened, I have produced states that now are, that removed previous ones. And so when I bring the king back into focus, we see that within his capacity, we see this very interesting, I don't want to say a dilemma, but interesting interplay between that which is not and that which is. In as many applications as there are of the others, since not being them, it is one thing, namely itself. That which is itself. Almost similar to that which is not, or difference. There's a way in which there is some, of course, a distinct identity between these things, these concepts and terms, but there's also a way in which they share in this interesting experience that they occupy that space of that which is not by their very identity. And out of all the ways that we can examine that which is, independent of those things that may cause difference to be, we can see how that which is not is related and participates with our king, that which is. And on the other hand, it is not those others, which are an indefinite number. So it is not by difference, because it maintains its identity. So then we shouldn't even be annoyed about this conclusion, precisely because it's the nature of kinds to allow association with each other. And if somebody doesn't admit that, then he needs to win us over from our earlier line of argument for it, in order to win us over from its consequences. So again, we have the identity argument, that although this is kind of an annoying, perhaps linguistic problem that arises, because something is distinct, it must be able to be thought of as such in order for it to be identified. Thought in this way produces some complexity. Thought in general, I think, produces complexity, and it must, because of the nature in which, the way in which these identities produce our reality. The visitor continues, "It seems that when we say that which is not, we don't say something contrary to that which is, but only something different from it. It's like this. When we speak of something as not large, does it seem to you that we indicate the small rather than the equal?" So let's speak of the word contrary for a moment. It's a word that I think is similar as conflict. The idea of contrary is that there is something against another, something that is opposed to another. And so it brings to mind a particular type of relationship, an oppositional relationship, something that cannot mix together, something that cannot blend together. But this is something that we have said is not the case. There are plenty of things that mix together. There are areas for which we understand that they cannot mix together, because by their nature, by their essence, their identity would be destroyed if they were to take on something else. It is the nature of change to follow this pattern. And so we don't say that that which is not has some adversarial or contrary relationship to that which is. Because if it did, there would be no blending of that which is not with that which is. And if there would be no blending between that which is not and that which is, the identity of that which is would be too readily blended into everything else. And it's interesting that through difference we are able to see this, because difference is sort of our mediator here. It is the thing that says, okay, there is a separation between the indefinite and the definite. The indefinite is something that participates in the definite. It is something that necessarily must, in order for something to be. So let's think about his analogy. When we speak of something that is not large, does it seem to you that we indicate the small rather than the equal? So let's think about this reasonably. We have the distinction of something that is not large, but we don't have an object to compare our difference. And so we are left to mind to think about various different things. We can think about a large object, something relative to the large object. So that large object is sort of the standard for what largeness is. We could certainly think about the small, because the small is not something that is large. But just because something is not large doesn't mean it is small, because there is more than just smallness. There is intermediate size. There is something that within largeness I think is unique and is separate from things of normal size. Again, I think there's a dependence here on contextual relevance. The observer matters. If we're thinking about the height of a human being, we can think about average, and we can think about largeness based on that average. But in the middle of that average, we wouldn't call them small. Small is on the tail end, in the opposite direction from large. But his question is, does it seem to you that we indicate the small rather than the equal? But it follows a similar logic. There's no reason to assume that we mean the contrary, when we can just as easily mean that the thing that we speak of when we say something is not large is equal to the thing in question. That we don't have to have some large thing in mind to think of equality. The visitor continues, so we won't agree with somebody who says that negation signifies contrary. We'll only admit this much: when not and non are preferred to names that follow them, they indicate something other than the names, or rather, other than the things to which the names following the negation are applied. So the principle of otherness. So this is an interesting concept. If we bring back our little standoff, the hypothetical standoff between that which is and that which is not, we introduce our referee here. Now I've changed my representation with the chess pieces here, so let's forget the formal structure that I introduced. The king still represents that which is, the queen now represents that which is not, and the bishop represents difference. I have them sort of facing each other, the king and the queen, and the bishop is just sort of standing between them, looking at this exchange. When we turn the queen to face us, away from the king, we put the spotlight on her, and we ask her about this not, about this non, or nothing. And what she tells us, I think, is something that is a bit relieving. I feel satisfied with what she has to say. She says that she is, but by her being, she does not wish to be the antagonist. That is not necessarily her role. It is merely to say that in absence, in nothing, in that which is not, there is otherness to be found. And if we go back to what the visitor has to say, the idea that he brings, that not and non are prefixed to names, that the queen is attached to various things that are, in a way, maintaining identity by telling us otherness, by telling us distinction, by showing us difference. Now the visitor also wants to pause and to think about this. He says, the nature of the different appears to be chopped up, just like knowledge. Knowledge is a single thing too, I suppose, but each part of it that has to do with something is marked off and has a name peculiar to itself. That's why there are said to be many expertises and many kinds of knowledge. It's good to know that the visitor is a human being. He made not necessarily a mistake, but a verbal recognition of how difficult this can be, of maintaining identity, but then also understanding how fluid a concept like difference can actually be. The nature of the different appears to be chopped up, just like knowledge. So he identifies that knowledge, which I will signify as the rook, it's a perfect thing, a tower, is one thing. But each part of it that has to do with something is marked off and has a peculiar name to itself. And so we can imagine if I placed it on some elevated surface, let's say, and I wish I had my pawns with me, but nonetheless, we can imagine placing the rook up on a pedestal, and beneath it are these pawns that represent the specific domains of knowledge. Now, it has not necessarily changed the identity of knowledge, but it has made more sophisticated its identity by its various identified parts. Now, I wonder at this point here, I wonder how much the observer plays into this. Here I find the religious sentiment quite strong. The pull of it is extremely strong. And that is to say, there's something quite profound, I think, about the creative element, the act of creation, and about an agent that is able to do such things. As I think about knowledge in its various parts, I think about agency in its various parts. We'll get into this later, I'm sure. If not now, eventually, in some number of months. But there is this thought in mind that wants to move a little bit away from the explanation of the bifurcation, maybe not bifurcation, but the multiplicity of sub-identities, and to examine what this necessarily means. Now, knowledge is a particular thing to conscious experience. Without man, can we say that there would be these various areas of knowledge? Certainly they're defined by man. Areas of knowledge have purposes in mind that suits the needs of man. Logic perhaps can be something that is extended beyond just the human being. It ought to be. But if we remove ourselves from the man-made categories, where we may find ourselves in a similar situation, we can take anything, concept, whatever, that is not of man, and examine an identity similarly. Man may not be aware of such an identity, and yet it has a sophisticated series of parts to it. I think we can, by probability, say that there are complex things in the universe that man isn't aware of. That is beyond just basic material substrate that lacks the type of heavenly input that we are used to, being conscious agents. The visitor says, and so the same thing happens to the parts of the nature of the different too, even though it's one thing. And Theaetetus rightly says, well, how is this the case? Difference is quite a bizarre category, unlike knowledge. So I want to outline the little what would we call this? Diorama or situation, strategic ordering of the chess pieces here. The bishop, again, is labeled as different, and I have him standing upon a little book elevated above the pawns that represent the various sub-identities of this discipline, of this difference, sorry. Again, and so the same thing happens to the parts of the nature of the different too, even though it's one thing. So what we know about the different, and difference in general, is that it is a relational thing. And it would seem, if we are to analyze it in this way, it's a relational thing that has many arms to it. The little pawns represent its arms. They go out and they do their business, and they communicate with various other things, other forms, other beings, whatever it might be. And by their communication, they spread the effect of that difference. And so what I'm doing now, positionally, is placing the pawns facing the king, facing the knight, facing the queen, facing the rook. And they are all exerting their influence, and yet the bishop, as the principal identity of difference, is standing in the corner, maintaining himself. So the next question that the visitor proposes, he says, is there a part of the different that's placed over against the beautiful? So we're going to have to reorganize our pieces, and we're going to take the queen to be the beautiful. We'll move some of our pawns out of the way. we'll place them back upon the book. So in this way we have the identities of the different that are elevated above the queen, or the beautiful. And so we have one aspect of difference in particular that has stepped forward and now is interacting with our beautiful queen. And so there are a few things that come up here. The first is, what does it mean to have something placed over against? Now, in the sense of overness, I've raised the pawn up on that book. So there is this sense of being above. And if we translate this to the identity of difference, what it does, it's a relational thing. And so the queen may not be alone here, but what she is not, her otherness will be exposed by this pawn. And what is her otherness? If that which is beautiful, what is exposed by the pawn is that which is other than the queen. So we could just take one out of a million potential examples. I'll place another pawn in a different direction facing the rook. And we could say that this is some different identity, but we don't have to attribute to it anything in particular. It could be the indefinite number of identities that are possible. And so the visitor asks, shall we say that it's nameless? Or does it have a name? Theaetetus responds, it has a name. What we call not beautiful is the thing that's different from nothing other than the nature of the beautiful. Now that's sort of a cop-out, I think. But we did the same. We said that there are so many different things that this could be otherness than beautiful, that we just sort of said that it is a label as such, effectively saying the same thing as Theaetetus. But then we can go back and do the exercise of what is the queen? What is the beautiful? How far does the beautiful permeate into our reality? And what exactly is the difference that is afforded by the pawn actually afford us? And it's unfortunate that I cannot show this image necessarily, but it's, given the narrative, this is sort of a powerful image that has unfolded. In the background I have the bishop with two pawns that are sort of at his disposal, waiting to find otherness and difference in other identities. But all the same, they're looking upon this point of attention that we have found. And there are two more pawns that are, one is looking at the queen, who is facing away, so the pawn is effectively looking at her back head, and the other pawn is looking at the rook. Again, the principality of difference is standing upon a small book. So we have this over and against type of characteristic here. So today happens to be a new day, new thoughts. And on this new day, I'm feeling a particular way, a bit sentimental. Good and bad can come of everything, especially that of the sentimental disposition. But I would like to keep it good, and so I want to spend this chunk of time that I have talking about the beautiful, and hopefully making some headway on that, because I felt this yesterday and the day before that this topic was coming, and while I didn't necessarily think about it explicitly for any lengthy period of time, I did realize that at least that it's important. that it's something that deserves time and reflection. So let's sort of do a dialogue. Might seem like a strange thing to say, as I'm just talking to myself into a microphone, but let's try to do a dialogue. So we're starting with the question of what is beautiful. Maybe we should start with a definition. We could think of an image, a question. Well, we've already asked a question, but a farther question. Let's pick an image. Let's pick an image that we can build on and reflect on. This image can be a real place, I suppose, or a real image, or it can just be conceptual, a minded creation. So this image that I think about, it comes to me in waves. And sometimes in waves of melancholy, sometimes in waves of sentimentality, sometimes it's quite present and in the moment. Words are not part of that experience. It's just the experience of receiving information from the environment. There are those contextual moments through which there's a bittersweetness that beauty can be found, like walking out, especially in the winter after work, after the sun has set. 7:30 at night is usually when I get off on my late days. And there's something beautiful about having your car being the only car in the parking lot. And when it snows, it seems like this surreal thing. And yet, I wouldn't want to dwell there forever. It's a nice moment when it happens. It's beautiful as it is. But life is just not reduced to something so simple. It's something much larger. Now, I mentioned something that comes to me periodically. It's something that I find a bit dangerous, again because of the sentimentality of it, the emotions that are drawn to it. It's a beauty that I had once known, and I had seen it destroyed. Maybe destroyed is too strong of a word. But let go, I think, is a better word to use. Now, in this dialogue, you say that of my expression, you say that this beauty can't be captured in words, yet what you've just spoken is full of beauty. Don't think, then, that beauty is something we receive, like a snowfall. Or is it something we project, like longing? Or perhaps it's both. A moment when the world outside and the world inside meet. And what in that meeting would you say something happens that we call beautiful? So, in response, I would say that beauty is something that can be captured in words, surely. It wouldn't be just right to say that what I have spoken was meant to imply that beauty is reducible. as long as there is experience to operate on top of this fertile substrate, then there should be no end to it. Only change. There is identity, but there is change. Now, to your question, do you think that beauty is something we receive, like snowfall, or is this something we project, like longing? To that I would say that beauty is received, it's interpreted. But we are creative agents, and we possess the ability to produce beauty. And for that, we should be thankful for. I think there is a reciprocal relationship, especially in the sense that we must be thankful for what we've been given. So I would say that it is both. And that third expression that you said, a moment when the world outside and the world inside meet. And in that meeting, something happens that we call beautiful. Perhaps you pose that as a question. I would say that that is accurate to a degree. I wonder about the conception of the world that is outside versus the world that is inside. Conceptually, it makes sense. But I think we can expand on that and make that more sophisticated. So in response, you say, then it seems you're saying that beauty is not merely in the eye of the beholder, nor is it wholly out there in the object, like some isolated beacon. Rather, it arises in a relation, and the relation itself has structure, perhaps even moral weight. You said, we must be thankful for what we've been given. So how to respond to this? I think your analysis on my stance is correct. I would like to talk about, though, this relation. You said it arises in relation. That is beauty. And the relations itself have structure, perhaps even moral weight. And yes, I do think that this is the right place to go. But also, I understand myself to be quite a limited being in terms of my sight. And I don't use my sight as a crutch, or my lack of sight as a crutch. But I recognize it because I have to admit myself a degree of ignorance on large matters. And my experience into this thing that we call reality only goes so deep. But all the same, when we think about beauty, we think about something that is. Something that has come to be, perhaps something that has ceased to be. So then why exactly, while we may not be able to see the totality of things, why exactly can we perceive this beauty so strongly? Who are we as these agents to design things, to do what we please with them? Not all of our designs will be beautiful, of course, but there's a way in which agency has such a freedom of play within this sandbox. And it makes no difference whether one creature expands beauty out into the entirety of being, or if one creature is able to see what it means to see beauty on all levels of this experience that we have. I think we are identifying a structure that has interwoven parts. And so, where I feel that this beauty brings us is that there is a quality about that which is that really extends our capacity in the way in which we participate with beauty, that it is this relational structure that in a way we are the receivers of information that precedes us, but our minds being these antennae, these receptors. We see it, we perceive it, we come into it, we fall in love with it. Perhaps we torture ourselves with it. But in response, you ask, would you say, then, that beauty is not just what is seen, but also what draws us forward? A kind of gravity of the good, felt even when unseen. Or to borrow your image, is beauty that which we cannot dwell in forever, but which makes every other place feel incomplete by comparison? Would you say that beauty discloses not just what is, but what is worth becoming? So let's take apart this response that you've provided me. Going with the first, would you say then that beauty is not just what is seen? I think it would necessarily be so. There are many things that we can see. There are many things that we come to know. And I think that there is an implicit process there by which, from the agent's perspective, there are many things to know. There are many things that I have come to know. There are many beautiful things that I have come to know. And so in the sense of what is seen, surely it seems quite obvious that this is not something that encompasses all of beauty. There's another sense in which this you could potentially mean this, in the sense of seeing itself. This could refer to the capacity of the agent that does the seeing, and I think for our purposes right now, this is where we're going to rest. And so what I mean is that at this level of experience, I think we can transcend our understanding. We can use various psychological tools, religious devices, scientific methods. We can use our reason, our intellect. We can expand ourselves to a certain point, but it would be foolish to think that we would be all-encompassing of beauty, let's say. We cannot transcend to become gods. I think our best is to become in relation to God. Now in the second you say, but also what draws us forward. And I think that that is correct, that there is this among the interrelated fibers of reality. And given this framework that is interactive, it provides structure, but the structure itself is not completely limiting. That even within the structure there is change. Within that aspect of change there is absence, but not absence to the sacrifice of that which is, of course. A kind of gravity of the good, felt even when unseen. I'm not entirely sure at that last part, felt even when unseen. I think it can be said that this is possible for many. There are so many different types of experiences, and I don't want to get caught up in the particulars. But certainly when speaking of capacity, the will and the light of the soul is that productive engine by which we can achieve a relationship to the good and to beauty. Your second question: would you say that beauty discloses not just what is, but what is worth becoming? And I would say yes. There are many things that we can perceive. I'm thinking about any number of physical objects that are in front of me. I have the figurine of the Queen as a chess piece in front of me. I can perceive her for her physical structure. She is something. But depending on her relations, it may expand or detract from this thing that is. In a similar manner, I could take this piece, which is made out of metal. I could bring it down to some fundamental state of that metal, destroy the image of the Queen, and it would be reduced to something that is different, relationally different. But as far as the comment about worth becoming, I think there is an implication there that there is focus, a commitment on the particular relation, the context of being, that seems to afford us so much, or to take from us so much. So, the question is, where do we go from here? And I'm anxious to hear your response. So we've established that beauty is this relational structure. Goodness falls into there as well. But perhaps as a closing matter, but only closing temporarily, I would want to consider the through line, the thing that penetrates me as a man, as a human being. And I don't wish to focus on the type of penetration of that which is, that would lead us to the dangers of seduction, distortion, but rather to focus on that which is good, that which is true, that which provides us with a productive alignment. And there's an issue between variability or potential and acting in a way that is right. Rightness, surely something relational, but also something that is quite structural, important, foundational. One of the interesting things that I am reminded of when I think about the document, the Magna Carta, is that there's a certain spirit that's associated with it. The spirit is fixed in time to a degree, fixed in time to the extent that there is an original context, there's original meanings. The structure, the political structure, the economic structure, the social structure was different. And yet, of the spirits that document had produced, if we focus on the good ones, we come to find that there is a spirit of independence. If we focus on independence, we know that independence in and of itself is not a good thing, but rather there's a part of it that leads us to the good. And so when we focus on those qualities of goodness and beauty that maintain a good spirit, I find there to be some interest. And since I mentioned that what I'm curious about is how this permeates me and how I may find it to a greater degree in my life, I pause for a moment and I think about, since today happens to be a Sunday evening before I go back to work, and given that I participate with many people throughout the day, there are many opportunities for which I can experience this beauty and expand a relationship in such a way that affords not only an interesting experience, but a lasting experience, something that affords structure to the heart, something that affords structure to the soul, not only to the person that I'm participating with, but also to myself. So in response to this, you say, live beautifully does not mean to seek the pretty or the novel. It means to act, moment by moment, in fitting relation to what is before you, to give presence to the other, to the task, to the silence, and to receive that presence in return. What comes from that is not always easy, not always happy, but it is always meaningful. And that, I think, is where beauty pierces us, not as ornament, but as truth carried in the body, in time, a structure of the soul in motion. So with that, I'd like to return to our dialogue. So it's been a little bit since we've been in here, but that discussion of beauty, I think it was useful. So I've saved the our modified chessboard, so to speak, in which the bishop is standing with his pawns, and he has dispersed two of his pawns. Again, I want to mention that the bishop signifies difference here, and so his effects, he reaches through the pawns. Difference is now looking at beauty, and is also looking at the rook, which I forgot what we have distinguished that as. I remember. So I believe the rook signifies that which is not beautiful. And we gave it that name because of, in part, Theaetetus' response. We sort of arrived there independently of him, but he says it has a name. What we call not beautiful is the thing that's different from nothing other than the nature of the beautiful. And so I think this sort of spurred the conversation of, well, what is the beautiful? And I think after that conversation, at least in my mind, there's a better understanding of how that which is not beautiful might be interacted with, or how it might exist, given how large of a thing that it is. I think we can think about it cynically, but we can also think about it in a more basic structural sense, in which there is not close enough relation to identify something that is beautiful or meaningful. Some of that, as I mentioned, it's relational. Some of that might be wound up in the agent's participation with it. Because, like with most things, if we boil something down, to its most simplest parts, or expand its participation in a much broader whole, we can find beauty somewhere, even if it seems to be difficult to see in an absence of such a strong relation to other things. Now the visitor prompts Theaetetus, and he says, "Go on and tell me what this is." Isn't it in the following way that the not beautiful turns out to be, namely, by being both marked off within one kind of those that are, and also set over against one of those that are? So I think essentially the visitor is touching on what we've identified, that within this otherness to beauty, we still find the same structure. It's still relation dependent. There is still this interwoven structure. There's this change, difference, etc. His first statement, isn't it in the following way that the not beautiful turns out to be? I sort of wonder if there's anything else to add on top of that. I suppose it could have been raised as a question if, initially, before we had explored beauty, if it was possible for that which is not beautiful to be, but it's obvious that it is at this point. Now Theaetetus responds to that, and he says yes. Then it seems that the not beautiful is a sort of setting of being over against a being. That's absolutely right, says Theaetetus. Now this over and against situation comes back to us. I wonder at the setup if this is, well, initially we mentioned this over against phenomena as it pertains to difference. But now we are seemingly moving away from difference, I suppose, and thinking about the not beautiful as the thing that is now over and against that which is beautiful. And this over and against, I have to think about the exertion of its influence. If anything, we can say that there is now a relationship between the beautiful and the not beautiful. And its participation probably is where we are going to be headed here in this dialogue. The visitor says, "Well then, according to this account, is the beautiful more a being than the not beautiful?" So my answer to that would be no, because being, that which is, occupies all of reality. Absence, contrariness, difference, change, are all aspects of this experience. The experience, from my perspective, has structure, but it's structure that includes all of this, the difference, the change, that which is not. In order to include it, it must be malleable. It must be something that is interactive and relational. But because that aspect exists, it does not deny the way that beauty moves through it. It is sort of the agentic thing that moves through that which is, that gives it structure in a sea of absence or nothingness. Theaetetus says not at all. The visitor responds, so we have to say that both the not large and the large equally are. Yes. So we also have to put the not just on par with the just, and that neither is any more than the other. Of course. And we'll speak about the others in the same way too, since the nature of the different appeared as being one of those that are. And because it is, we have to posit its parts as no less beings. Again, keeping in mind that the parts of difference are the pawns that we've symbolically used to illustrate that. So it seems that the setting against each other of the nature of a part of the different and the nature of that which is not any less being, if we are allowed to say such a thing, than that which is itself. And it does not signify something contrary to that which is, but only something different from it. So here we find ourselves on the next page. And so I'm going to read these 2 pages. And just like last time, go back into the reading and interpretation. So Theaetetus responds clearly. The visitor, so what shall we call it? Obviously, that which is not, which we were looking for because of the Sophist, is just exactly this. Then does it have just as much being as any of the others, as you said it did? Should we work up the courage now to say that that which is not definitely is something that has its own nature? Should we say that just as the large was large, the beautiful was beautiful, the not large was not large, and the not beautiful was not beautiful, in the same way that that which is not also was and is not being, and is one form among many that are? Do we, Theaetetus, still have any doubts about that? No. You know, our disbelief in Parmenides has gone even farther than his prohibition. How? We've pushed our investigation ahead and shown him something even beyond what he prohibited us from even thinking about. In what way? Because he says, remember, never shall it force itself on us, that that which is not may be. Keep your thought far away from this path of searching. That's what he says. But we've not only shown that those which are not are, we've also caused what turns out to be the form of that which is not to appear. Since we've shown that the nature of the different is, chopped up among all beings in relation to each other, we dared to say that that which is not really is just this, namely, each part of the nature of the different that's set over and against that which is. And what we've said seems to me completely and totally true. The visitor says, nobody can say that that which is not, which we've made to appear and now dare to say is contrary of that which is. We've said goodbye long ago to any contrary of that which is, and to whether it is or not, and also to whether or not an account can be given of it. With regard to that which is not, which we said is, let someone refute us and persuade us that we've made a mistake, or else, so long as he can't do that, he should say just what we say. He has to say that the kinds blend with each other, that that which is and the different pervade all of them and each other, and the different shares in that which is, and so, because of that sharing, is. But he won't say that it is that which it shares in, but that it is different from it, and necessarily, because it is, different from that which is, it clearly can be what is not. On the other hand, that which is has a share in the different. So, being different from all of the others, it is not each of them, and it is not all of the others except itself. And so that which is, indisputably, is not millions of things, and all of the others together, and also each of them are in many ways, and also are not in many ways. True, says Theaetetus. And if anyone doesn't believe these contrarieties, he has to think about them himself and say something better than what we've said. But if he thinks he's recognized a problem in it and enjoys dragging the argument back and forth, then he's been carried away by something that's not worth much of anyone's attention. To go by what we've just been saying anyway, a thing like that isn't clever or hard to discover, but the other thing is both difficult and at the same time beautiful. What other thing? Says Theaetetus. The thing we said earlier, that is, we should leave pointless things like this alone. Instead, we should be able to follow what a person says and scrutinize it step by step. When he says that what's different is the same in a certain way, or that what's the same is different in a certain way, we should understand just what way he means, and the precise respect in which he's saying that thing is the same or different. But when someone makes that which is the same appear different in just any old way, or vice versa, or when he makes what's large appear small, or something that's similar appear dissimilar, well, if someone enjoys constantly trotting out contraries like that in discussion, that's not true refutation. It's only the obvious newborn brainchild of someone who has just come into contact with those which are. Definitely. In fact, my friend, it's inept to try and separate everything from everything else. It's the sign of a completely unmusical and unphilosophical person. Why? To dissociate each thing from everything else is to destroy totally everything there is to say. The weaving together of forms is what makes speech possible for us. That's true. Think about what a good moment we picked to fight it out against people like that, and to force them further to let one thing blend with another. Why a good moment? For speech is being one kind among those that are. If we were deprived of that, we'd be deprived of philosophy, to mention the most important thing. Besides, now we have to agree about what speech is, but we'd be able to say nothing if speech were taken away from us, and weren't anything at all, and it would be taken away if we admitted that there is no blending of anything with anything else. So that's the conclusion of these 2 pages. So let's go through these step by step. So I want to start for a moment on the previous page. When the visitor says, "So it seems that the setting against each other of the nature of a part of the different and the nature of that which is not any less being, if we're allowed to say such a thing, than that which is itself." So that's an important distinction to make. We take our king symbolically as that which is, and we take our difference, the bishop, and we place him in front of the king, let's say. That the difference is something that is. And when we take his pawns, that is the pawns of difference, we turn them out to look away, to look at all of the possibility of difference, of otherness. And we find other identities in the sphere. We find our knight, we find our queen. Difference in this, like the visitor says, over and against, is an agent of that which is, in essence, I think. Just because that which is may be classified through difference does not mean that through difference that which is anything less. In fact, that which is not is said to be something different from the identity of that which is itself. So while the king may represent the entirety of that which is, we are also able to see other things that are, without getting confused that the other things which we identify, seemingly being separate from that which is, maintains itself. And in this way, in difference, we find that which is not. And it does not signify anything contrary to that which is, but only something different from it, as the visitor says. So when I turn the page back to the 2 pages that we are currently on, I find now the visitor saying, then does it have just as much being as any of the others, as you said it did? And he's referring to that which is not, from Theaetetus's response. Should we work up the courage now to say that that which is not definitely is something that has its own nature? So let's think a little bit more about this, that which is not. I think at this point we've described this in a few different ways. We've seen it as in the form of otherness. There is something quite important, I think, about the bishop being subject to the king, being subject to that which is, difference being subject to that which is. And although difference may have parts of itself, like many identities do, just as we have many parts to ourselves, although it may be fundamental, difference can find itself identifying different things. And by that stance, I think we can identify the parts of difference that have permeated through our experience. We can classify separation and difference, I think, in a uniform manner, but then we would be speaking about the bishop and not his pawns that go out and identify different things, much like we would speak about that which is as some solid identity versus the other things that difference and otherness seem to outline for us. Now, the question is, are we calling this separation, this indefinite classification of otherness into difference, as something that is that has its own nature, whatever that might mean? What can we say of something that has its own nature, something that has a fundamental place in our experience? Then surely that which is not does. But we see that which is not through the action of otherness. We can see absence by something that we have identified. The only way that we would not be able to see absence if we thought about the king himself. But we seldom ever think about the king himself. We think about the object through which otherness identifies identity. And so I don't think it would be a far-flung thing to speak of that which is not as having some nature. For what is nature? Some identifiable characteristic, a pattern that is reliable. Now the visitor continues and he says, should we say that just as the large was large, the beautiful was beautiful, the not large was not large, and the not beautiful was not beautiful, in the same way that that which is not also was and is not being, and is one form among the many that are. So let's think about this for a moment. Now the visitor in the dialogue here, he in the literary form, when he says just as the large was large, there's one large is in italics, the other is not. Same with the beautiful and beautiful. What we are identifying is identities. We are identifying just as the king is, but also the queen is, but the queen shares in that which is. When we think about that which is large and large, I think we think about the same sorts of things. We think about the principal identity of the thing that is large, or the king that is, and then we think about the large as being related to something identifiable. And he says, in the same way that that which is not also was and is not being. Now the not being is a difficult hurdle, I think, to surmount, even though we've been through this exercise before. In the same way that that which is not also was. It was in the sense that it is an identity, but it is not in the sense that it identifies difference, but not to the absence of that which is. And he says, do we, Theaetetus, have any doubts about that? And he says, no. Then we go into Parmenides. Parmenides' warning, never shall it force itself on us, that that which is not may be. Keep your thoughts far away from this path of searching. To this, the visitor goes on to say, but we've not only shown that those which are not are. So let's pause there for a moment. And of course, I understand that there is this risk of the tediousness of going over these items again and again, but it's useful exercise. The expression, but we've not only shown that those which are not are. So let's take an example. I already mentioned that I have my chess pieces set up in the following manner. The king is at the center. Difference in the face of the bishop is facing me. The king is looking at the back of the head of the bishop. And then to the north, to the east, and to the west of the king stands the bishop's pawns, who signify difference, otherness. And they're facing other primary principalities or identities, the queen, the rook, the knight. And I can even say that there's another pawn facing south, facing the bishop himself. to identify the difference. Now, the notness, let's say, is a transjective. It is the in-between. It is that otherness. That which is not is held within the spirit of the pawn, let's say. The doer of difference. And it is that way because it serves as the boundary between identifying something that is and identifying something that is other than that which is. And so we have two things that are, but are separated. They are separated by non-being, but not non-being that is not. It is non-being that is. It is not being so that it is able to differentiate. So that it may have some role to play. To break uniformity to a degree. The visitor says, we've also caused that which turns out to be the form of that which is not to appear. I would say that we certainly have. We have found him in the disciple of the pawn of difference. Since we showed that the nature of the different is chopped up among all beings in relation to each other, again, the pawns that are chopped up, looking at all of these different things, or I should say, that are dispersed from the bishop and his authority, that which is difference. We dare to say that that which is not really is just this, namely, each part of the nature of the different that's set over against that which is. Now, I think there's something interesting about the concept of the nature of something. When our visitor says, since we showed that the nature of the different is chopped up among all beings in relation to each other, we dare to say that that which is not really is just this, each part of nature of the different that's set over against that which is. Now, the nature of difference, the nature of, again, the bishop that is symbolized by this difference and spread apart into different pieces. Again, chopped up into these pawns that hold something fundamental about difference. The identity of difference, we can understand it by the symbol of the bishop, and yet split into its constituent elements, we understand that it to be something that differentiates, separates identities into categories, into otherness. The visitor continues, nobody can say that this, that which is not, which we've made to appear and now dare to say is the contrary of that which is. And we say that it is not the contrary of that which is because it participates with that which is. That without that which is, then difference wouldn't make any sense. Its own identity would have no grounding to it. He says, we've said goodbye long ago to any contrary of that which is, and to whether it is or not, and also whether or not an account can be given of it. With regard to that which is not, which we've said is, let someone refute us and persuade us that we've made a mistake. Or else, so long as he can't do that, he should just say what we say. He has to say that the kinds blend with each other, that which is and the different pervade all of them and each other, and that the different shares in that which is, and so because of that sharing, is. So let's pause here for a moment and think about sharing, think about blending. It's a dangerous thing to confuse an identity of something. And given that we seem to have such a network of this blending and of sharing, the unfortunate consequences of otherness and difference show us that falsehood and disorder, confusion may arise. I think it leaves us longing for that unified sensibility, for the king just to be, and have all of the rest of it fall in line with it. But of course, the king, being that which is, would be left this rock, the solid, motionless, as has been stated, identity that does not change, that does not really do anything. And in that sense, it almost seems like the idea or the concept of nothingness. It is void of doing. It is void of being. But it is. But through difference and otherness, we have reflection. We have identification. We have motion in its difference. The visitor says, but he won't say that it is that which it shares in, but that it is different from it, and necessarily, because it is different from that which is, it clearly can be what is not. On the other hand, that which is has a share in the different. So, being different from all of the others, it is not each of them, and it is not all of the others except itself. So that which is, indisputably, is not millions of things, and all of the others together, and also each of them are in many ways and also are not in many ways. A difficult thing to conceptualize, I suppose. But going back to his saying, but he won't say that it is that which it shares in, but that it is different from it. And necessarily, because it is different from that which is, it clearly can be what is not. a relational riddle, it would seem, tied together by something that we know almost fundamentally to be true, seen in one instance, absent in another, when one object or one thing is at the center place of mind. That which is, he says, has a share in the different. We could also say that the different has a share in that which is. But that which is surely is different from all of the others, from the queen, from the rook, from the knight, from the bishop, except for itself. That which is has pawns of its own, just like difference has its own pawns. I think by its nature, we can say that there are millions of things that are, but there is only one thing that is. Now, skipping ahead a little bit to what the visitor has to say, when he says that what's different is the same in a certain way, or that what's the same is different in a certain way, we should understand just what way he means, and the precise respect in which he's saying that the thing is the same or different. Now there's a danger, I think, in this relational structure. The danger is relativism, in the sense that everybody can have their own truth. Now certainly everybody has their own perspective. But as we have identified the existence of difference and the existence of that which is not, and the interrelatedness among things, can cause us, as we perceive them, to be incorrect to the way that things are. And so I think there's a few different dimensions through which we can identify that. The first is, as I've said, it is that process by which man can make a mistake through the very existence of non-being and difference. The second is when matters of perspective are true, and people's perspective lines up, or rather, another person's perspective is sufficient to see another's, then we understand sufficiently context. And rather than being one person's truth, it is a truth that is a particular piece of the puzzle that is to be seen. This piece of the puzzle can be shared. It can be placed in a broader context of that puzzle, of that image. And it is that image that, well, I suppose there are many things that can be said about that image, because the image is the true, in this case, it is the true perspective of that which is. The true perspective of that which is under the influence of this dispersion of difference. And so what the visitor is saying here is that there must be a method by which we boil things down in a relevant manner, identify the surrounding characteristics, the surrounding relationships, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to understand an image or a vision, or the way in which another person thinks. He goes on to say, but when someone makes that which is the same appear different in just any old way, or vice versa, or when he makes what's large appear small, or something that's similar appear dissimilar. Well, if someone enjoys constantly trotting out contraries like that in discussion, that's not true refutation. It's only the obvious newborn brainchild of someone who's just come into contact with those which are. Now I'd say, or a person like the Sophist who understands things and their relations and wishes to disrupt the minds who have just encountered, or as the visitor says, newborn brainchild of someone who just came into contact with those which are. It's inept to try to separate everything from everything else. Again, in order to do that, we have to get rid of difference. We have to either consolidate it into that which is, consolidate it into the king, or say that everything is nothing. To dissociate each thing from everything else is to destroy totally everything there is to say. The weaving together of forms is what makes speech possible for us. So we're approaching the end of the second page, and consequently approaching the end of this episode. So I like to spend a little bit more time with the remaining information that we have, and to think about this concept of the form. The weaving together of forms is what makes speech possible for us. Now, a form is something that must be identified in mind. It is something that the mind perceives. It is information that is gathered from the environment, in part. I think it can be something that is also abstract, something that is in thought. I think there can be an interrelation between these two things. Much like the concept of that which is, we can materialize it in the form of the king as this metal chess piece. We can identify something that is like the king, which is a bit different from the broad concept that we wish to symbolize by his material expression. And within the interplay of the totality of all of this, I'm reminded again of that experience of otherness and of difference that permeates all things. I think about boundary, I think about identity, and all of this is perceivable. And by its perception and by our faculties, we differentiate. Certainly at a particular level of perception, but that level of perception need not well, I suppose there's not much more to be said. Our perception is I want to think of our perception as existing on one level. There are plenty of things, I think, plenty of devices by which man can understand the world around him without the sensory devices that he has. They can be more acute, they can be above and below in certain respects of his visual acuity, of his auditory acuity, and all of the other forms by which information can be processed. We exist at one level, where perhaps many are possible. And I think by consequence of this, our experience of the forms are limited. Despite how creative we can be. The visitor says, for speech is being one kind among those that are. If we were deprived of that, we'd be deprived of philosophy. To mention the most important thing. Besides, now we have to agree about what speech is. But we'd be able to say nothing if speech were taken away from us and weren't anything at all. And it would be taken away if we admitted that there's no blending of anything with anything else. So I think I'm going to end this episode here and continue next time with part 9 of the Sophist.